The first time Quinter saw humans, he couldn't help but let out a delighted chuckle. They were so tiny, so fragile-looking with their slender limbs and small frames. At just under 2 meters tall, they barely reached his knee. As a Silsarian standing proud at 9 meters in height, with elongated limbs perfectly evolved for their low-gravity world, Quinter found these Earthlings utterly adorable. "Welcome to Silsar," he said, his deep voice booming across the landing pad where the human vessel had touched down. The ship itself was minuscule compared to Silsarian spacecraft, resembling more of a toy than an interstellar vehicle. The delegation of humans emerged cautiously from their craft, their movements somewhat bouncy in Silsar's gravity, which measured at approximately 1/6 of Earth's. Quinter observed them with scientific curiosity. As a geological surveyor by profession, he had been assigned the diplomatic duty of greeting these visitors simply because he happened to be working in this sector when first contact was established. "Thank you for your hospitality," replied a small female human, stepping forward with surprising grace despite the gravity difference. "I'm Captain Nina Rodriguez, leading this expedition. With me are Dr. Alan Wells, our xenobiologist, and Mark Chun, our engineering specialist." Quinter lowered himself slightly, still towering over them. "The Supreme Council has assigned me as your guide during your preliminary visit. I am Quinter, geological surveyor for the Eastern Plains sector." He watched as the humans' gazes traveled upward along his frame, their eyes widening at his proportions. Their expressions of awe made him feel a swell of pride. The Supreme Council had given him strict instructions to maintain a reasonable distance from the visitors initially, to allow them time to acclimate to the Silsarian physiology without feeling intimidated. However, seeing them now, so small and harmless, Quinter thought the precaution seemed excessive. "Your world is magnificent," said Dr. Allen, the scientist, as he stared at the surrounding landscape. The landing area was bordered by a forest of massive trees that would dwarf even the tallest Earth redwoods, their trunks wider than many human buildings. In the distance, crystal-like structures of the nearest Silsarian settlement glittered under their binary suns. "We've prepared accommodations suited to your dimensions," Quinter explained, gesturing toward a small building that had been hastily constructed for the humans. It appeared like a child's playhouse next to the standard Silsarian structures. "Our architects found your specifications challenging to work with." He couldn't keep a hint of amusement from his voice. "I'm sure they did," Nina replied with a polite smile. "We appreciate the effort." Quinter watched with fascination as the humans began unloading equipment from their ship. Despite their small size, they moved with efficiency, carrying devices and containers that seemed proportionally heavy for their frames. He noticed how Mark, the engineer, hoisted a large metallic case with relative ease, adjusting quickly to the reduced gravity. "You adapt well to our gravity," Quinter observed. Mark grinned. "We're trained for various gravitational environments. Lower gravity than Earth's is actually quite pleasant once you get used to it." To demonstrate, he gave a small hop and rose nearly 2 meters into the air before landing lightly on his feet. Quinter's interest was piqued. He had studied the preliminary data on Earth, but hadn't fully comprehended what it meant for a species to evolve under higher gravitational pull. These humans had developed in an environment where every movement required more strength, where their muscles and bones had formed to withstand forces much greater than those on Silsar. A flash of something close to concern flickered through Quinter's mind. The Supreme Council had classified the humans as a Type C species, cute but harmless, similar to the Viridians who had visited 2 cycles ago. The Viridians had been small, peaceful botanists who had come to study Silsarian flora and had departed without incident. The humans, however, had something in their bearing that suggested they might not fit so neatly into that category. Later that evening, while the humans rested in their quarters, Quinter broke protocol. Curiosity had always been his weakness. It made him an excellent geologist, but sometimes led him to bend rules. He approached the area where the human expedition had set up their equipment, intending to observe them from a discreet distance. He found 3 of them outside their ship, examining soil samples. Captain Nina was directing Dr. Allen as he used a scanning device, while Mark calibrated what appeared to be a heavy drilling apparatus. They hadn't noticed Quina yet, partially hidden as he was behind a stand of giant ferns. What happened next made Quina freeze in surprise. The drilling equipment malfunctioned, emitting a sharp hissing sound. Mark reacted instantly, grabbing the machine, which must have weighed at least several hundred kilograms by Silsarian estimates, and physically lifting it away from his colleagues. He set it down several meters away with a controlled motion that spoke of significant strength. Quina's perception shifted slightly. These humans were more physically capable than he had initially assumed. Still tiny and adorable, yes, but perhaps not quite as helpless as the Supreme Council had categorized them. Stepping forward into view, Quina cleared his throat. I apologize for the intrusion. I was concerned about your comfort. Nina turned, her expression momentarily surprised before settling into a diplomatic smile. Quina, we're fine, thank you. Just taking advantage of the daylight to gather some preliminary samples. Your equipment seems heavy, Quina noted, glancing at the drilling apparatus Mark had so easily repositioned. Standard field equipment, Mark replied with a shrug. A bit bulky, but manageable, especially in your gravity. Dr. Allen looked up from his scanner. We evolved on a world with much stronger gravitational pull. Our musculature and bone density reflect that environment. Here, we're considerably stronger than we would be at home. Interesting, Quina said, filing this information away. Tomorrow, I'll be showing you more of our world, including the crystal forest to the north. The terrain is challenging. We're looking forward to it, Nina replied, her eyes gleaming with what Quina now recognized was not just diplomatic politeness, but genuine eagerness for exploration. As Quina departed, he found himself revising his initial assessment. These humans were indeed cute with their tiny stature and delicate features, but there was something else about them, something that the Supreme Council might have overlooked. They possessed a quiet confidence and physical capability that hinted at hidden depths. The thought both intrigued and unsettled him as Silser's twin moons rose in the violet sky above. Morning on Silser brought a spectrum of colors that had no names in Earth languages. The binary suns cast dual shadows across the crystalline landscape as Quina led the human expedition into the wilderness surrounding the landing site. The forest ahead is what we call the luminescent groves, he explained, pointing toward a stand of enormous trees whose bark seemed to shimmer with internal light. The flora here has evolved to maximize photosynthesis from our dual suns. Nina walked at the front of the human group, her movements becoming increasingly confident in the lower gravity. Dr. Allen followed, constantly scanning with his devices and occasionally stopping to collect samples of soil or small plant matter. Mark brought up the rear, carrying what appeared to be defensive equipment along with scientific tools. Quina noticed this and felt a twinge of curiosity. Are the weapons necessary? There are no predators in this region that would consider beings of your size as prey. Nina glanced at the sidearm holstered at her hip. Standard protocol for any planetary expedition, Quina. We never know what we might encounter, even on supposedly safe worlds. Her tone was casual, but Quina detected a firmness beneath it. They approached a massive root system where the ground had eroded away, creating a natural ravine. To Quina, it was a minor obstacle, barely a step across. To the humans, it presented a gap of nearly 4 meters. Allow me to assist, Quina offered, extending his hand to form a bridge. Nina smiled, but shook her head. Thank you, but we can manage. She took several steps back, then ran forward and leaped across the gap with ease, landing gracefully on the other side. Dr. Allen and Mark followed suit, each clearing the distance without strain. Quina blinked in surprise. The jump would have been impressive even for a Silsarian child. For creatures so small, with such slender limbs, it seemed almost impossible. You seem shocked, Nina noted as Quina stepped across to join them. I had not anticipated such agility, he admitted. Mark grinned. On Earth, I could maybe jump 1 meter high and 2 meters across with effort. Here, he demonstrated by effortlessly springing upward, reaching almost 3 meters in height before landing. It's like having superpowers. Superpowers? Dr. Allen explained, fictional abilities beyond normal capability. What Mark means is that Earth's gravity is approximately 6 times stronger than Silsur's. Our muscles and cardiovascular systems developed to function under that pressure. Here, those same muscles can exert the same force but meet much less resistance. I see, Quinner said, though he wasn't sure he fully comprehended the implications. These humans, with their tiny frames, possessed a strength-to-weight ratio that far exceeded what their appearance suggested. They continued their journey, reaching a crystal-clear stream that cut through the forest floor. To Quinner, it was barely a trickle, but to the humans, it appeared as a significant waterway. This feeds into the Sapphire Basin 10 kilometers east, Quinner explained. The water contains mineral compounds unique to Silsur. Our scientists would be interested in how you find its composition. Dr. Allen approached the water's edge, taking samples with a small device. The mineral content is fascinating. These compounds would be considered extremely rare on Earth. While they worked, Quinner noticed Nina staring intently at the surroundings, her hand occasionally drifting toward her weapon. Is something concerning you, Captain? She hesitated before responding. Just maintaining awareness. It's a habit from previous expeditions. Previous expeditions? You've visited other worlds before ours. Several, she said simply, not elaborating further, each with its own surprises. This revelation added another dimension to Quinner's perception of the humans. They weren't just scientists venturing into space for the first time. They were experienced explorers who had encountered other alien species and environments before Silsur. The Supreme Council believed you were similar to the Viridians who visited us previously, Quinner said. Small, peaceful researchers seeking knowledge. Nina's expression shifted slightly. We are peaceful researchers, Quinner, but humanity has learned that exploration requires preparation for all contingencies. Mark joined the conversation, having set up what appeared to be a small defensive perimeter around their sampling site. What Nina means is that we're scientists first, but we're trained to handle ourselves if things go sideways. Sideways? Quinner queried, unfamiliar with the idiom. If unexpected problems arise, Dr. Allen clarified. As they spoke, Quinner's communicator emitted a soft chime. He checked the device and frowned. We should return to the settlement. The atmospheric monitors indicate a magnetic storm forming in the upper atmosphere. Dangerous? Nina asked, immediately alert. Not immediately, but potentially so within hours. Silsur experiences periodic magnetic disturbances that can disrupt electronics and disorient some of our native fauna. The humans quickly packed their equipment with practiced efficiency. As they began the return journey, Quinner caught Nina and Mark exchanging glances, followed by subtle hand signals. They were communicating something without words, something they didn't want him to understand. Quinner felt his curiosity deepen. These humans continued to surprise him. They were undoubtedly cute with their tiny stature, but he was beginning to suspect the Supreme Council had severely underestimated them in ways that went beyond physical strength. As they made their way back toward the settlement, the sky began to change color, shifting from its normal violet hue to a deep, ominous crimson. The winds picked up, carrying particles that glittered like diamond dust in the fading light of the binary suns. The magnetic storm is intensifying more rapidly than forecast, Quinner said, concern evident in his voice. We need to alter our course. There's an old outpost near here, a geological survey station that was decommissioned last cycle. It has magnetic shielding. Nina nodded sharply. Lead the way. The group changed direction, moving through increasingly dense undergrowth. The enormous plants of Silsur loomed ever larger as the wind bent their trunks, creating an eerie, creaking sound that echoed through the forest. How far to this outpost? Mark asked, adjusting the heavy equipment on his back with surprising ease. About 2 kilometers north, Quinner replied, pushing aside a massive fern that blocked their path. For me, a short walk, but for your size. We'll keep up, Nina interrupted, her tone leaving no room for doubt. The storm continued to build around them. Vibrant auroras began to dance across the sky, beautiful, but harbingers of the electromagnetic chaos to come. Quenner's communicator emitted a series of erratic beeps before going silent. "Communications are down," he announced, "and electronics will become increasingly unreliable as the storm intensifies." Dr. Allen checked his scanning device, confirming heavy electromagnetic interference. "Our equipment is already showing signs of disruption." Mark pulled out a different device from his pack, more robust-looking than their scientific equipment. "Military-grade emergency communicator," he explained when he caught Quenner staring. "Hardened against EMP. We should still be able to contact our ship if necessary." Quenner raised what would be equivalent to an eyebrow. "Military-grade? I was told your expedition was purely scientific." "It is," Nina said firmly. "But Earth has learned to prepare for contingencies. Hardened equipment is standard for any off-world expedition." Before Quenner could respond, a low, rumbling sound reverberated through the forest floor. He froze, his elongated form suddenly tense. "What was that?" Dr. Allen asked, already reaching for his scanner. "Rokwa," Quenner whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. "We need to move. Now." "What's a Rokwa?" Mark asked, but Quenner was already moving, his long strides covering ground quickly. "A predator," he called back. "The largest on Silser. Normally they avoid settlements, but the magnetic storms disrupt their sensory organs. Makes them aggressive, disoriented, and very, very dangerous." The humans broke into a run to keep pace, their smaller forms bounding with surprising speed across the uneven terrain. In Silser's low gravity, they moved with an almost gazelle-like grace, leaping over obstacles that would have been challenging even on Earth. Another rumble, closer this time, sent vibrations through the ground. Quenner's pace increased further, forcing the humans to push themselves to their limits. "There!" Quenner pointed ahead to a structure that appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal, its facets reflecting the stormlight in prismatic patterns. "The outpost." They reached the entrance, a doorway that stood 15 meters tall, designed for Silsarian physiology. Inside, the space was cavernous by human standards, filled with equipment sized for beings 3 times the height of the tallest human. "Seal the entrance," Quenner instructed, activating a control panel that caused a crystalline barrier to slide across the opening. "The shield should protect us from the worst of the magnetic disturbances." Nina was already directing her team. "Mark, check the perimeter. Allen, assess our equipment status." She turned to Quenner. "How dangerous is this Rokwa?" "Exactly." Quenner's expression was grim. "They're apex predators. 12 meters long, armored hide, multiple limbs ending in claws that can shear through our toughest building materials. They hunt by sensing electrical impulses, brain waves, nerve signals. The storms confuse them, make them attack anything that emits electrical signals. Like our equipment," Dr. Allen concluded, "and our nervous systems. Yes, even Silsarians avoid confrontation with Rokwa. The last time one attacked a settlement, there were casualties." Mark returned from his survey of the outpost. The structure seems solid, but there are multiple entry points. Some of the shielding looks damaged, probably from age and lack of maintenance. Another tremor shook the ground, this one strong enough to rattle some of the abandoned equipment. A low, keening wail echoed from somewhere not far from the outpost. "It's found us," Quenner said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Nina unholstered her weapon, a sleek, compact device that Quenner hadn't paid much attention to before. "What can penetrate a Rokwa's hide?" "Very little. Our largest weapons can injure them. But..." Quenner gestured to a corner of the outpost where a massive object sat partly covered by protective sheeting. "That assault tank was once stationed here for protection, but it's been decommissioned. Engine removed, weapons systems disabled." The humans approached the tank, which to them was the size of a small building. Standing beside it, they appeared even smaller, more vulnerable than before. Quenner felt a surge of protective instinct. These tiny beings were his responsibility, and he had led them into danger. "We need to strengthen the weakest entry points," Nina decided. "Mark, can we use parts from that tank as barricades?" Mark examined the massive vehicle. The armor plating would be perfect, but each panel must weigh tons. We can't move them without equipment. We don't need to move the whole thing, Nina said, studying the tank with a calculating eye. Just enough to reinforce the vulnerable areas. A thunderous crash from outside interrupted their planning. The Rokwa had reached the outpost and was testing the outer walls. Crystal fragments rained down from the ceiling as the structure shuddered. It's trying to break through. Quinner moved toward an internal control panel. There's an emergency protocol, a sonic deterrent that might drive it away. But when he activated the panel, nothing happened. The magnetic storm had rendered the outpost systems inoperable. We need a plan B, Nina said calmly, turning to Dr. Allen. How are our power reserves? The energy weapons will work, but the magnetic interference might affect their accuracy, he replied. And we have limited charges. The Rokwa struck again, this time with enough force to crack one of the outer walls. Through the fissure, Quinner caught a glimpse of the creature, a nightmarish form with multiple segmented limbs and an armored carapace that gleamed with an oily iridescence in the stormlight. It's breaking through the north wall, Quinner announced, his voice tense. We need to evacuate. To the inner chambers. Several Silsarian workers who had been sheltering in the outpost began to move deeper into the structure, their movements betraying their fear despite their imposing size. Nina made a rapid decision. Allen, go with them. Help coordinate the evacuation. Mark with me. Dr. Allen hesitated only briefly before nodding and following the retreating Silsarians. Nina turned to Mark, her expression determined. We need that tank position to block the breach. Even partially, Mark surveyed the massive vehicle, calculation evident in his eyes. The storm is disrupting most of our equipment, and we don't have time to rig any lifting mechanisms. Nina holstered her weapon. Then we do it the old-fashioned way. Quinner watched in confusion as the two humans approached the decommissioned tank. What are you doing? You can't possibly move that. It weighs more than 20 Silsarians could lift. Nina ignored him, positioning herself at one end of the tank while Mark took the other. On three, she called her colleague. 1, 2, 3. What happened next would forever change Quinner's perception of humans. Both Nina and Mark braced themselves against the tank and pushed. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a groaning sound of metal against crystal, the massive vehicle began to move. Inch by inch, the humans shifted its position, their faces contorted with effort, but their determination unwavering. Quinner stood frozen in astonishment. These tiny beings, these cute visitors whom the Supreme Council had classified as harmless, were physically moving an object that would challenge even a team of Silsarians with mechanical assistance. The Rokwa struck again, breaking through more of the wall. Its prehensile sensing appendages whipped through the opening, searching for prey. Almost. There, Nina grunted, her muscles straining visibly as she and Mark gave one final, coordinated heave. The tank slid into position, its armored bulk now blocking the breach, just as the Rokwa tried to force its way through. The creature howled in frustration, its attacks redoubling against the new obstacle. It won't hold for long, Mark gasped, breathing heavily from the exertion. But it gives us time to prepare. Quinner couldn't take his eyes off the humans. How? How did you do that? That tank weighs tons. Nina wiped sweat from her brow, her expression grimly satisfied. Earth gravity is about 6 times stronger than Silser's. Our muscles developed under those conditions. Here, we can achieve feats that would be impossible at home. But you're so small, Quinner said, still struggling to reconcile what he had witnessed with his preconceptions. Size isn't everything, Mark replied with a tight smile. Especially not here. A Silsarian guard rushed into the chamber. The Rokwa is circling the outpost, looking for another way in. The eastern entrance is vulnerable. The shield generators are failing. Nina turned to Mark. We need a more permanent solution. Ideas? Mark surveyed the chamber, his gaze settling on a collection of defunct equipment. Those sonic deterrents Quinner mentioned, could we manually rewire them to function without the main power? Possibly, Quinner said, still distracted by what he had just witnessed. But the control systems are complex. Not the control systems, Mark interrupted. Just the emitters themselves. If we could provide a direct power source and the right frequency. Nina nodded. Do it. I'll hold position here in case our friend breaks through. As Mark rushed off with Quinner to examine the sonic equipment, the Rokwa renewed its assault on the tank barricade. The armored vehicle held, but the impacts were shifting its position slowly away from the breach. Nina drew her weapon and took up a defensive stance. When Quinner glanced back, he saw her silhouetted against the massive tank, a tiny figure preparing to face a monster 3 times Quinner's own size. And in that moment, the word cute seemed entirely inadequate to describe these Earthlings. Mark worked with incredible speed, dismantling the sonic emitters and reconfiguring them with components from the humans' own equipment. His fingers moved with precision despite their relative size compared to the Silsarian technology. The conductor's here, he muttered, more to himself than to Quinner. If I bypass the main control circuit and route power directly from our portable generators. Quinner watched in fascination. How do you understand our technology so quickly? Mark didn't look up from his work. Physics is universal. Different applications, same principles. Plus, Nina wasn't entirely forthcoming about our previous encounters with other species. We've seen similar tech before. This revelation raised even more questions in Quinner's mind, but there was no time to pursue them. A tremendous crash from the main chamber signaled that the Rokwa had made progress against the barricade. How much? Longer? Quinner asked urgently. Almost there, Mark replied, connecting the final components to a power source from his pack. This should emit a frequency that targets the Rokwa's sensory receptors, assuming their biology works the way you described. A scream of pain, human, not Silsarian, cut through the air. Nina! Mark bolted to his feet, the partially assembled device in his hands. Quinner followed, his long strides quickly outpacing the human despite Mark's enhanced agility in the low gravity. They reached the main chamber to find Nina on the ground, blood visible on her uniform. The tank had been pushed aside enough for the Rokwa to force one of its limbs through the gap. The creature's sensing appendage had struck Nina, throwing her against a far wall. The Rokwa was now forcing its armored head through the breach, its multiple eyes glowing with an eerie bioluminescence intensified by the magnetic storm. Without hesitation, Mark activated the makeshift sonic device. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber, inaudible to human or Silsarian ears, but precisely calibrated to disrupt the Rokwa's sensory organs. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The creature recoiled, emitting a shriek that seemed to reverberate through the entire outpost. Its limbs thrashed wildly, scraping against the crystal walls and damaging its own armored hide in its desperation to escape the painful stimulus. Mark rushed to Nina's side, while Quinner approached the breach cautiously, watching as the Rokwa retreated from the outpost, still shuddering under the effects of the sonic attack. It worked, he announced with relief. The Rokwa is withdrawing. Nina, Mark was helping the captain into a sitting position. Status. Despite her injury, Nina managed a weak smile. Functional. It just caught me off guard. She glanced at the device in Mark's hand. Nice work. Can you stand? He asked, already supporting her weight. I think so, she replied, wincing as she attempted to rise. Just a little disoriented. Quinner moved to assist, but before he could reach them, Nina had already regained her footing with Mark's help. Even injured, she carried herself with a dignity and resilience that belied her small stature. The storm is beginning to dissipate, Quinner reported, checking a monitoring device that was coming back online as the magnetic interference decreased. We should be able to return to the settlement soon. Nina nodded, then turned to survey the chamber. The scene told its own story. The massive tank pushed aside as if it were a toy. The breached wall with the Rokwa had almost broken through, and the tiny sonic device that had ultimately driven the monster away. When we return, she said quietly, I believe we need to have a more honest conversation with your Supreme Council about Earth and humanity. Quinner could only nod in agreement. The classification of humans as cute but harmless now seemed not just inaccurate, but almost laughably inadequate. As they waited for the storm to fully pass, Quinner found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about these visitors. Size, he was beginning to understand, could be the most deceptive measure of all. Dawn broke over Silser with unusual clarity after the magnetic storm had cleared the atmosphere of particulates. The violet sky seemed to shimmer with renewed vibrancy, and the binary suns cast their dual light across a landscape transformed by the night's events. The outpost bore the scars of the Roqua's attack, cracked walls, damaged equipment, and the massive tank still sitting at an awkward angle where the humans had positioned it. Silsarian workers were already beginning repairs, their expressions still reflecting disbelief at how the crisis had been averted. In the main chamber, Nina sat with Dr. Allen, who was treating her injuries with Earth medical technology. Mark was helping the Silsarians restore power to the outpost systems, easily climbing structures designed for beings 3 times his height. Quinner approached Nina, having spent much of the night in communication with the Supreme Council. "How are you feeling?" She looked up, her face pale but composed. "I'll survive. Your Roqua pack's quite a punch, but I've had worse." Quinner settled himself beside her, folding his long frame to better converse with the human. "The Supreme Council is sending representatives. They're eager to re-evaluate our initial assessment of your species." Nina's expression remained neutral. "I imagine they are. I must confess," Quinner said, choosing his words carefully, "we may have been presumptuous in our categorization of humans. When we first received your communication signals and images, you seemed so cute." Nina supplied with a wry smile. "For lack of a better term, yes." Quinner gestured to the tank. "Yet you and Mark moved something that would challenge our strongest. You faced a predator that has terrorized Silsarian outposts for generations. It's not about being strong," Nina said after a thoughtful pause. "It's about adapting. Humans evolved on a world that demanded we become resourceful, versatile, and persistent. Earth tested us with high gravity, extreme climates, and countless predators. Those who survived passed on their traits." Dr. Allen joined the conversation. "From a biological perspective, our species developed under pressure, quite literally in terms of gravity. Our bone density, muscle fiber composition, and cardiovascular systems all reflect an environment much harsher than Silser's. And yet you appear so fragile," Quinn mused. "Appearances can be deceptive," Nina replied. "Something I think both our species are learning." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several Silsarians, their formal attire marking them as representatives of the Supreme Council. They entered with an air of authority that seemed slightly diminished as they surveyed the damage in the out-of-place tank. "Ambassador Lauren," Quinner greeted, rising to his full height. "These are the Earth representatives, Captain Nina Rodriguez, Dr. Alan Wells, and Engineer Mark Chun." He indicated each human in turn. The lead Silsarian, Ambassador Lauren, regarded the humans with evident curiosity. "We have received Quinner's report of last night's events. It is difficult to reconcile with our previous understanding of your species." Nina stepped forward, appearing tiny but somehow commanding beside the towering Silsarians. "Perhaps we should discuss revising that understanding, Ambassador." Indeed, Lauren turned to examine the tank that had been used as a barricade. "Our records indicate this vehicle weighs approximately 12 metric tons by your Earth measurements. And you moved it." "We did what was necessary to survive," Nina replied simply. Mark joined them, wiping his hands on a cloth after finishing with the power systems. "Low gravity's quite an advantage. On Earth, we need heavy machinery to budge that thing. You said your gravity is 6 times stronger than ours?" Ambassador Lauren asked, the question directed at Dr. Allen. "That's correct. What you witnessed was a demonstration of physics more than exceptional strength. Though I should note that Captain Rodriguez and Mark are also particularly well-trained individuals." Lauren exchanged glances with the other council representatives. "We owe you an apology, humans. We classified your species based on size alone, without considering the implications of your evolutionary environment." "No offense taken," Nina said diplomatically. First contact scenarios are always complicated by preconceptions on both sides. Still, Quinner interjected, I was present. I witnessed not just physical capability, but extraordinary resourcefulness and courage. These qualities transcend mere biological adaptation. The acknowledgement seemed to please Nina, though she maintained her professional demeanor. What we hope for, Ambassador, is a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. We came to Silser seeking scientific exchange and possibly trade relations. Those goals haven't changed. Ambassador Lauren nodded solemnly. The Supreme Council will want to renegotiate the terms of our agreement with a more accurate assessment of your capabilities. There was a new note of respect in his voice that hadn't been present when he entered. As the formal discussions continued, Quinner found himself standing slightly apart, watching the interaction between the diminutive humans and his towering kin. The dynamics had shifted overnight. Where once the Silsarians had viewed the humans with indulgent amusement, now there was genuine respect, perhaps even a touch of wariness. Later, as preparations were made to return to the main settlement, Quinner found Nina alone, gazing out through a repaired section of the outpost wall at the Silsarian landscape. You're very quiet, he observed. Just thinking, she replied. About perspective. Perspective? Nina smiled. On Earth, we're the big ones compared to most species. We build our world to our scale and rarely consider what it might be like to be truly small. Coming here, experiencing how it feels to be the tiny ones in an enormous world, it's humbling. And yet you adapted immediately, Quinner noted, using our gravity to your advantage rather than being intimidated by our size. That's the human way, she said simply. We adapt. We survive. Sometimes we even thrive in circumstances that should, by all logic, overwhelm us. Quinner considered this. The Supreme Council is discussing inviting a human delegation to visit our capital city. They're already redesigning the accommodations to be more respectful. Nina laughed softly. No more dollhouse-sized furniture? Something like that. Quinner hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering him since the previous night. Were you being truthful when you said your expedition was purely scientific? Your equipment, your training, they suggest other purposes. Nina turned to face him fully. Our mission is scientific and diplomatic, Quinner, but humanity has learned caution in our explorations. We've encountered species that weren't as welcoming as yours. Species that mistook our size for weakness and acted accordingly. And how did those encounters end? Quinner asked quietly. Some badly, some well. It depended on how quickly both sides could overcome their preconceptions. She glanced toward where the tank stood. We don't want to be feared, Quinner, but we don't want to be underestimated either. Quinner nodded slowly. I think I understand. After a pause, he added, would your people consider hosting a Silsarian delegation on Earth? I confess I'm curious to experience your world, to feel the gravity that shaped your species. I think that could be arranged, Nina replied with a genuine smile. Though you might find movement challenging under our gravity. We'd need to design mechanical assistance for your comfort. A small price to pay for understanding, Quinner said. I'd like to see firsthand this world that created beings capable of lifting tanks. 2 days later, the primary settlement buzzed with activity as preparations were finalized for a formal reception. The Supreme Council had upgraded the status of the human delegation from scientific visitors to priority diplomatic envoys, a designation that reflected their dramatically revised assessment of Earth's importance in the interstellar community. Quinner found himself appointed as the official liaison to the humans, a promotion that recognized his unique experience with the species. He was overseeing the modification of a meeting hall when Ambassador Lauren approached. The Council has reviewed all available data on Earth, Lauren said without preamble. Their gravity, their evolutionary history, their technological development. We've been making significant miscalculations. In what way? Quinner asked, though he had his suspicions. We assumed that smaller species would develop more slowly, with less complex societies and technologies. Lauren gestured to where Mark was helping Silsarian engineers modify communication equipment to accommodate both species' sensory ranges. Yet they've achieved interstellar travel despite evolving on a world that, by our standards, should have crushed them under its own gravitational tyranny. Quinner considered this. Perhaps that's why they advanced so quickly. Pressure creates adaptation. Precisely the conclusion our xenobiologists have reached, Lauren confirmed. And it raises questions about other assumptions we've made regarding interstellar species classification. In the center of the settlement, a demonstration area had been established where the humans had agreed to showcase some of their capabilities in Silser's gravity. A small crowd of Silsarians had gathered, their towering forms creating a living amphitheater around the space. Nina and her team emerged from their quarters, now dressed in what appeared to be athletic attire rather than their formal uniforms. The change made them look even smaller, their frames seemingly more fragile without the structure of their official garments. "Thank you all for coming," Nina called out, her voice amplified by a translator device. "We thought it might be valuable to demonstrate some aspects of human physicality in your gravitational environment. This is not meant as a display of superiority, merely an exchange of knowledge." What followed was nothing short of astonishing to the Silsarian audience. The humans performed feats of acrobatics that would have been impossible on Earth. Soaring leaps that carried them 15 meters into the air, effortless one-armed handstands held for minutes at a time, carrying loads that would have required mechanical assistance in Earth's gravity. Mark demonstrated the principles of leverage by lifting a Silsarian construction beam that weighed nearly a ton. Dr. Allen, despite his scientific focus, executed a series of flips and tumbles that had the Silsarians murmuring in amazement. But it was Nina who provided the most dramatic demonstration. A damaged shuttlecraft had been positioned at the edge of the area, a small Silsarian vessel weighing approximately 20 tons. On Earth, this would be impossible for any human, she explained to the crowd. But here, with your gravity, she positioned herself at the nose of the craft, planted her feet firmly, and began to push. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the shuttle began to move. Centimeter by centimeter, Nina shifted its position until it had rotated nearly 45 degrees from its original placement. When she stepped back, breathing heavily but otherwise composed, the silence among the Silsarians was profound. Quinner moved to her side. "Was that necessary?" asked quietly. Nina wiped sweat from her brow. "Respect is necessary, Quinner. Fear is not what we want, but understanding is essential." She raised her voice to address the crowd. "What you've seen today isn't magic or even particularly special among humans. It's simply physics, the same universal laws that govern both our worlds, expressed differently through our biologies." Ambassador Lauren stepped forward. "Captain Rodriguez, on behalf of the Supreme Council, I extend formal recognition of Earth as a major gravitational divergent species, a classification reserved for beings whose evolutionary environment differs significantly from the galactic average." He paused. "It is our highest non-native classification." Nina bowed slightly. Earth accepts this recognition and looks forward to establishing permanent diplomatic relations with Silser. As the formal proceedings continued, Quinner found himself reflecting on how dramatically his perception had shifted in just a few days. The humans were still objectively small, still proportionally fragile-looking compared to Silsarians. In some ways, they remained as visually endearing as they had seemed upon first contact. But cute was no longer the word that came to mind when he observed them. Instead, Quinner thought of resilience, of adaptability, of the remarkable way these beings had evolved under conditions that should have limited them, but instead had forged them into something extraordinary. That evening, a celebration was held to mark the new diplomatic status between Silser and Earth. The Central Plaza had been modified to accommodate both species comfortably, with raised platforms for the humans to interact with Silsarians at eye level. Quinner found Nina at the edge of the gathering, watching the interactions with evident satisfaction. "A successful day," he observed. "Very," she agreed. "Your council learns quickly." "Necessity is persuasive," Quinner replied. "Though I must admit, That shuttle demonstration was somewhat theatrical. Nina's eyes sparkled with amusement. Sometimes a visual aid is worth 1,000 diplomatic communiques. And the Rokwa? Was that convenient timing as well? Now you're being paranoid, she chided gently. We didn't orchestrate a magnetic storm or a predator attack, but we did make the most of the situation when it arose. Quentin nodded thoughtfully. The Supreme Council has approved my request to join the reciprocal mission to Earth. I'll be among the first Silsarians to visit your world. You'll find it challenging, Nina warned. Our gravity will feel crushing at first. Your respiratory system will need assistance, and movement will be difficult without mechanical support. I understand the risks, Quinter said. But after what I've witnessed, I want to understand the force that shaped your species. To experience, even briefly, the pressure that created beings capable of such strength in a small package. Then we'll welcome you to Earth, Nina said, extending her hand in the human gesture of agreement. When Quinter carefully took in his much larger one, she added, just promise not to call us cute in your official reports. Quinter laughed, a deep, resonant sound that drew glances from nearby Silsarians. I believe that classification has been permanently retired, though I can't promise some of my colleagues won't think it privately. As long as they remember what the cute ones can do, Nina replied with a smile. 3 months later, as Quinter boarded the human vessel that would take him and a small Silsarian delegation to Earth, he carried with him a small memento, a piece of metal taken from the tank that Nina had moved during the Rokor attack. It served as a personal reminder that in the vast diversity of the universe, appearances were perhaps the least reliable measure of capability. The human ship was tiny by Silsarian standards, forcing Quinter to hunch uncomfortably in the specially modified quarters. Yet as he felt the first subtle shifts of acceleration pressing him into his support couch, he found himself eagerly anticipating the pressure of Earth's gravity, the crushing force that had compressed carbon into diamonds and humans into one of the physically strongest species, pound for pound, that Silsar had yet encountered. The journey would be uncomfortable, the destination challenging, but Quinter had learned a valuable lesson about looking beyond size and first impressions. In the cosmos, as on Silsar, the most impressive strengths often came in the most unexpected packages. As the ship broke orbit, Nina's voice came over the communication system. Comfortable, Quinter? Not remotely, he replied honestly. But I'm looking forward to seeing the world that made lifting tanks possible. Then welcome aboard, she said warmly. Next stop, Earth, where the cute ones come from. And despite himself, Quinter laughed, already anticipating how his worldview would expand further when he experienced firsthand the crushing gravity that had forged these remarkable beings. These humans who had proven that small and powerful were not mutually exclusive terms in the language of the universe. The stars streaked past as the ship accelerated to interstellar velocity, carrying ambassadors of two worlds separated by size, but united by curiosity, resourcefulness, and the universal drive to understand the cosmos and their places within it, no matter how large or small those places might appear to be.